The night was like an open wound, and that bridge, I was there. Detective Bruno. The explosion had shattered everything, but something in the silence of that space screamed that this was just the beginning. Officer Nora was there much earlier than I was that night. She was staring at the bridge from a distance, but that night there was a fear in her eyes that I had never seen before. Mickey was always a shadow, never center stage, but everywhere. I found him in the back alley that night. I went back to the office. I pinned all the evidence to the wall. I pulled a red thread between them. But something was still missing. It was as if a piece of the puzzle was still hiding itself. Nora always knew when to talk to me, but this time it was different. In that deserted bar, she said something I will never forget. Maybe she was keeping a secret from me too. That night, Nora sat alone in her room. She had lost her brother, and ever since then, there was always something in her eyes. Bruno could never forget that night. The footprints left in the empty streets were more than a simple path. They had a message, and Bruno was searching for an answer. Mickey never said where he came from. Maybe for the same reasons he never wanted to be seen, but Mickey always had information that could change the world. The next morning, a call came. Another one. Another scene. Bruno and Nora were the first to arrive. It was as if someone was playing a game with them, a game they didn't know the rules of. While everyone was still busy with the evidence, the sound of Mickey's slow footsteps echoed through the alley. With a half smile and a tired look, he came forward. In his hand was a folder, something that might change all your equations. Bruno grabbed the folder right there. Without a word, he opened it. Nora stood to the side, watching. A few photos, a schedule, and a name. Everything fit together, but not in the way they expected. That night, everyone returned to the old office. Nora pinned the map Mickey had given her on the wall, full of red marks, routes, names. Bruno just watched. His silence was heavy. Everything was forming a new picture. But the picture of what? The new route led them to an old bar downtown. Nora entered from one side, Bruno from the other. The suspect was there, a gray fox who seemed to know everything. But before they could say anything, the back door opened. Bruno walked towards the gray fox with firm steps and a heavy gaze. No one in the bar dared to say anything. Everything was silent except for the sound of Bruno's footsteps echoing in the heavy air of the bar. Bruno stood a few steps away from the fox. The silence was tight. All eyes were on the two of them. The fox slowly lowered his glasses and smiled a little. "You should ask me, shouldn't you?" Bruno just nodded. Everything was ready to be revealed. "You're a murderer, Fox," Bruno said dryly. The fox laughed loud and carefree. "You think so?" Bruno put his hand on the table, moved closer. "Yeah, I think so." The fox stood up and put his glasses back on. "Then you have to prove it." The fox calmly pointed his hand towards the court. "You think I'm the only one here?" Bruno turned his gaze to the door. It was closing. Something was strange. He felt that at any moment it could be something more. The sound of a gunshot echoed throughout the bar. Bruno quickly threw himself back. The fox didn't move. There was a small smile on his face, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "I'm not alone here, Bruno," a male voice said from behind him. Everything changed suddenly. The door of the bar opened quickly and two people entered. Bruno turned his gaze in that direction. One of them was a male weasel dressed in black, and the other was a female white rabbit wearing a yellow shirt. Bruno realized that these were not only witnesses to the incident, but also had an important role in the case. "The people here know more than you think," said the weasel firmly, without hesitation. Bruno's gaze hardened. "Then why did you come here?" The weasel smiled and pointed to the white rabbit next to him. "To find the answer." The rabbit nodded slowly and looked at the fox. Bruno looked at the two of them for a moment, but there was something in the weasel's eyes that convinced him that their story was more honest than he had thought. Perhaps this was just the beginning of a complex game. All eyes were on Bruno. He paused for a moment, then said in a clear voice, "You two know a lot more than you're letting on." The weasel just smiled. "It's all just a mystery, Bruno." Bruno slowly walked back to the bar door. His gaze was still fixed on the weasel and the white rabbit when the door slammed shut, but no one knew what was about to happen. There was nothing left but silence as Bruno trudged off into the darkness. Maybe this was the end, maybe not. But deep in the shadows, something moved. He kept walking without looking. In the night, things were happening that no one could have predicted. Bruno was still moving when he felt someone following him. Slow, steady steps, but constant. When he reached a narrow alley, he suddenly stopped. He looked back, but all he saw were shadows through the smoke and fog of the dark night. Something inside Bruno warned him that this meeting would change his fate. When the shadow got close enough, a familiar face became clearly visible in the fog. Bruno was unable to make out the face clearly before a familiar voice broke through the night. "I was looking for you, Bruno." The voice was masculine, calm, and full of mystery. With the weasel's quiet voice, a dark truth was revealed. Bruno paused sharply, his heart beating faster. This moment would be etched in his mind forever. Now all the pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. A moment after the revelation, the weasel stepped back with a mysterious smile. Bruno sensed danger. Suddenly, the weasel turned and ran away. Bruno ran after it without a moment's pause. Bruno, panting, reached the end of the alley, but there was no one there. Not a sound of footsteps, not a shadow. The weasel seemed to have disappeared into the fog. Bruno felt that something was not right here. It had disappeared very strangely. As Bruno looked around, a small object next to the trash can caught his eye. A metal necklace with a small key-shaped pendant. He put on his gloves, bent down, and picked up the necklace. It wasn't just an object. It was a sign. A door, a lock, and a new path. Just as he held the necklace in his hand, it was enough to make him decide to change his path. He didn't know who was after him or why, but it wasn't a simple game anymore. That necklace was opening something. Maybe the door to another murder. The alley led to a narrow back street that led to old industrial buildings. There was a rusty metal door, half open, and footprints left in the mud and dirt. Bruno moved forward cautiously, as if everything was waiting for him to enter. Behind that door, the truth awaited him. Or perhaps a trap. The rusty door opened with a soft groan. Bruno stepped inside. Faint voices came from upstairs, a sound like whispering, or perhaps the breathing of someone trying to remain hidden. His heart beat faster. He wasn't alone. He was taking his steps slowly, but that voice was already clear. Someone was upstairs, walking, maybe thinking he still had time. But he was wrong. Bruno went towards the stairs, one step away from coming face to face with someone who knew everything, or wanted to destroy everything. The flashlight's light hit the corner of the darkness. A quick movement, a shadow that he pulled back. Bruno stepped forward carefully. The same black coat, the same cold gaze. It was him. The silence between them was like a rope that could break at any moment. Now there was only one question left. What was the fox running from? Bruno took a few steps forward. The fox was now standing fully in the light. Bruno said in a quiet but firm voice, "It's time for you to speak." The fox smiled, not with happiness, more like someone who knows that many things are too late. The silence was heavy for a moment, until soft footsteps were heard behind Bruno. He turned quickly, his hand close to his belt. But the shadow approaching him was familiar. An old face, one that should have disappeared long ago. It was Mickey. He looked at the fox and said in a choked voice, "Now it's time for you to say it yourself. I can't stand behind you anymore." Bruno finally caught the gray fox. The fox slowly reached into his coat, but Bruno stood there like a rock, fearless, ready for anything. It was just a question. Who would move first? The first move is always the one that changes everything. The fox seemed to have been waiting for this moment. His eyes were flashing, and before Bruno could even blink, he attacked with speed. But Bruno, as always, was ready. This was no simple fight. This was a clash of two worlds, one seeking escape, the other seeking justice. The fox pulled something shiny from under his coat, a metal object, small but deadly. His hand swung, ready to strike. Bruno reached out, caught the blow, the sound of bone and metal echoing through the shed. A row of iron crates fell with a thud behind them. There was no turning back now. Someone had to surrender. He paused for a moment just before the window. Then, with a long leap, he jumped out of the broken frame. Bruno was right behind him, but he missed the crucial moment. The fox ran away. Bruno stood motionless, staring at the footsteps that were walking down the narrow alley. No sound, no movement, just determination. He had to follow. All it took was one mistake from that fox. The footprints were fading into the mud and dirt, but Bruno could see the signs. That gray fox wasn't running away, it was leading to where? To a trap or an end. The alley was a dead end. The gray fox stopped, panting. There was no way out. Bruno arrived a few steps behind. He was panting, but his weapon was still down. For a moment, their eyes locked. There was no time for words, no place to run. The gray fox stood there, panting, with a look that screamed fear more than anything else. There was no way to escape, only a decision that had to be made. Everything happened in a second. The sound of a shot, the fox's body recoiled with the impact of the bullet and hit the wall. Its eyes remained open for a moment, then fell silent. The silence after that shot was heavier than any sound it had ever heard. Everything was silent for a few seconds, until the sound of footsteps came from behind. It was Nora. In the fading light of dawn, she found herself panting. Her gaze fell on the fox, then on Bruno, and a moment formed between them that only those who have given a lot of life can understand. Bruno was panting. The tip of his gun was still down, but the tremor in his hand told him that this end had not come easily. The gray fox lay motionless in the middle of the alley, as if he had chosen the end of the line himself. The sound of Nora's approaching footsteps was the only thing that broke the silence. A chapter had ended, but the case still smelled of blood. Nora took a few steps forward. The thick fog had swallowed the alley, but the sound of a puck falling on the asphalt rang out in the silence of the night. Bruno didn't lag behind either. This time the game would be over, either for that fox or for one of their own. It all happened in the blink of an eye. A shadow jumped out of the fog. The sound of a shot echoed through the alley. Then silence. Nora was lying on the ground, her hand still on the gun. Bruno jumped, his heart screaming in his chest. Nora was holding himself up with difficulty. He was panting, his hand pressed to his side. Blood dripped slowly from his fingers onto the wet asphalt. Bruno appeared behind him, staring into the darkness. They had to end it before it was too late. Bruno took refuge behind a metal trash can. Nora laid down gently on the floor. Her breaths were short and ragged, her eyes locked with Bruno's. She smiled faintly and whispered, "I didn't think it would end like this." Bruno said nothing. He just bowed his head. The distant sound of sirens was coming, but it was too late for Nora. Bruno took refuge behind a metal trash can. Nora laid down gently on the floor. Her breaths were short and ragged. Her eyes locked with Bruno's. She smiled faintly and whispered, "I didn't think it would end like this." Bruno said nothing. He just bowed his head. The distant sound of sirens was coming, but it was too late for Nora. The thick fog covered the alley. The sound of their breathing was all that remained. Bruno stood beside Nora's body, his gaze fixed on the ground. like a voice that would never return. From that distance, Logan, wounded and bent, still held his weapon in his hand. Their eyes locked. No words were needed, no explanation. This was the final moment. The moment when justice comes with the smell of gunpowder. Bruno raised his weapon. There was nothing in his gaze but pain and decision.